From 1936 to 1952, there was a series of 5 cases regarding issues of segregation in the U.S. Supreme Court. In each of the cases, minors of the Negro race, through their legal representatives, seek aid of the courts in obtaining admission to public schools of their community on a non-segregated basis. In each instance, they had been denied admission to schools attended by white children under laws requiring or permitting segregation according to race. This segregation was alleged to deprive plaintiffs of their equal protection of the laws under the 14th Amendment. In each of the cases, other than the Delaware case, a 3-judge federal district court denied relief to the plaintiffs on the so-called separate but equal doctrine announced by this court in Plessy v. Ferguson. Under that doctrine, equality of treatment is accorded when the races are provided substantially equal facilities, even though these facilities be separate. In the Delaware case, the Supreme Court of Delaware adhered to the doctrine but ordered the plaintiffs to be admitted to the white schools because of their superiority to the Negro schools. The plaintiffs contended that segregated public schools are not equal and cannot be made equal, and hence they are deprived of the equal protection of the laws. Because of the obvious importance of the question presented, the court took jurisdiction. Argument was heard in the 1952 term, and re-argument was heard in the term in certain questions propounded by the court.
After 16 years of conflict that had plagued the states across the nation, the decision was one of the first steps in reversing hundreds of years of oppression and would kickstart the civil rights movement. Post-Civil War America was a time of radical reconstruction. The ultimate goal of the Civil War had shifted to a fight for equality and civil rights, ending with the establishment of the 13th Amendment, which legally prohibited slavery. This was followed by the passage of the 14th and 15th Amendments, which established equal protection under laws despite race, country of origin, or past position of servitude, and guaranteed that citizens of the United States, regardless of color, could not be denied the right to vote. However, Southerners in opposition to black enfranchisement put in poll taxes and literacy tests which successfully stopped many blacks from voting. Along with this disenfranchisement, Southerners also put in place Jim Crow laws. These were local and state laws which provided for racial segregation in public facilities. This went along with the separate but equal doctrine, which arose in the 1890s. This doctrine was used in court cases to validate racial segregation, such as during Plessy v. Ferguson. In this case, 30-year-old Homer Plessy was arrested and jailed for sitting in a white section of a train car. This was a deliberate attempt to protest the passage of the Separate Car Act in Louisiana. The Supreme Court of the United States heard the case, and Justice Henry Brown, who represented the 7-man majority for the prosecution, wrote, "A statute which implies merely a legal distinction between the white and colored races has no tendency to destroy the legal equality of two races. The object of the 14th Amendment was undoubtedly to enforce the absolute equality of the two races before the law. In the nature of things, it could not have been intended to abolish distinctions based upon color, or to enforce social as distinguished from political equality, or a compelling of two races upon terms unsatisfactory to either." The sole protester, Justice John Harlan, recognized the potentially devastating effects of the implication of segregated laws and stated, "Our Constitution is colorblind, and neither knows nor tolerates classes among citizens. In respect of civil rights, all citizens are equal before the law. The present decision, it may be well apprehended, will not stimulate aggressions more or less brutal and intruting upon admitted rights of colored citizens, but it will encourage the belief that it is possible, by means of state enactments, to defeat the beneficent purposes of the people of the United States had in view when they adopted the recent amendments of the Constitution. However, the decision set the present of the separate facilities for whites and blacks were inherently equal and thus constitutional."
In the wake of Plessy v. Ferguson, the African American experience in America was defined by vast injustices and evident discrimination in society. Lynchings in the Deep South became the primary way of intimidating and demoting African Americans to second-class citizens. An unfortunate increase of lynchings reached 2,500 by the year 1900. Out of this social upheaval arose the NAACP, founded by W.E.B. Du Bois, Jane Addams, and John Dewey in 1910. This group would go on to play a vital role in the reversal of legal discrimination against African Americans and in the Brown v. Board of Education case. Along with this early call for change came Executive Order 8802 from President Roosevelt in 1941, stating that there shall be no discrimination in the employment of workers in defense industries and in government because of race, creed, color, or national origin. Other positive motions toward desegregation came socially as Jackie Robinson became the first African American player in Major League Baseball in 1947. Another such social implication that would further contribute to mounting racial tensions was the white flight to the suburbs. The ruling in Shelley v. Kramer ruled that discrimination in housing was unconstitutional, though the suburbs remained largely dominated by white nuclear families, keeping African Americans in inner cities and continuing a process of urban decay. Such early motions began to mount towards underlying tensions that reflected a discontent with the evident lack of equity between races. This such tension would become a driving force behind the decision in Brown v. Board of Education and would kickstart the civil rights movement.
The first in the sequence of 5 cases, Murray v. Maryland, Thurgood Marshall decided to challenge the University of Maryland School of Law's racial acceptance policies. The court agreed that because of the disparity between black and white schools, this violated the notion of separate but equal. In Missouri ex rel. Gaines v. Canada, the NAACP had to again force their hand regarding a black student's refused acceptance into an all-white law school, and as there were no all-black law schools in the state, suggested that they finance his education in another. Under the Equal Protection Clause, required the state of Missouri to provide within its ability an education for Lloyd Gaines. A similar decision was made in Sweat v. Painter. McLaurin v. Oklahoma Board of Regents of Higher Education, Thurgood Marshall and the NAACP stepped in to defend a student who was intentionally separated from his peers. Ruled that inflicted actions were adversely impacting McLaurin's learning. In the Brown v. Topeka Board of Education case, 13 Topeka parents of 20 students brought forth a class action lawsuit against the Topeka Board of Education. The case began by the angered parents of Linda Brown, who due to the segregation in the school district had to walk 6 blocks to a bus stop to attend the African American school Monroe Elementary instead of the other white Sumner Elementary, which was located only 7 blocks from her home. Her father, Oliver L. Brown, who worked as a welder in the shops of Santa Fe Railroad and was also an assistant pastor in his local church, was encouraged to join the lawsuit by other upset parents and became the named plaintiff. The Topeka NAACP took charge in the case, recruiting the parents as plaintiffs. These 5 cases were heard as Brown v. Board of Education under the Supreme Court, with NAACP's chief counsel, Thurgood Marshall, representing the prosecution. A decision was finalized under the Warren Court, and in reading this unanimous decision, the Supreme Court Justice Warren referenced various psychological implications of segregated schools. All but one justice personally rejected segregation, but the court members questioned whether or not the Constitution gave the court the power to order its end. However, it was believed that the 14th Amendment gave way to argue the cause, resulting in a unanimous decision to desegregate public schools, forever changing the national attitude towards civil rights.
This decision was met with much hostility and outrage, and mounting tensions resulted in the issue of the Southern Manifesto. Quoting, "We regard the decision of the Supreme Court in school cases as clear abuse of judicial power. It climaxes a trend in the federal judiciary undertaking to legislate in derogation of the authority of Congress and to encroach upon the reserved right of the states and the people. Contrary to the almost passive compliance to Southern resistance of civil rights principles during the period of Reconstruction, the manifesto was met with much resistance by the federal government. This was made evident in the integration of Little Rock High School. When white mobs brutalized the African American students who would be attending a previously all-white school, President Eisenhower, a Republican who was reluctant to support civil rights, sent the National Guard to protect the students on their way to school. Not only did this force Eisenhower's hand in the matter of civil rights, but it was also the first step. It was also the first time that federal troops were sent to protect African Americans since Reconstruction. Following the decision, the nation experienced vast political reform. In 1964 marked the passage of the 24th Amendment that outlawed poll taxes that had long been a means used to disqualify African American voters. This was soon followed by the passage of the Civil Rights Act, a landmark decision which legally outlawed discrimination based on race, sex, religion, or nation of origin, and would set a precedent for the standard of acceptance that would carry into the 21st century. The Voting Rights Act furthered the attempt to overcome barriers set by hundreds of years of oppression that had prevented African Americans from exercising their right to vote on state and national levels.
On a social level, the era of change prompted vastly different reactions. Such stark differences in opinion were epitomized in the Emmett Till murder, in which 14-year-old Emmett Till was brutally lynched after attempting to flirt with a white woman. Images of his mutilated body were broadcast on national television, prompting outrage and calls for change against a method of control that had been widely overlooked for a century. Calls for change also took form in the Montgomery bus boycott that followed Rosa Parks' arrest as she refused to give up her seat in the whites-only section of the bus. But perhaps the biggest social implication to arise from evolving points of view was Dr. King's March on Washington that united individuals, regardless of race, from all over the country to hear his pivotal I Have a Dream speech. The events which occurred in the decade following the Brown v. Board of Education decision convey the grand impact it made on America's political platform along with in society. The decision created political conflict through Southern opposition. As this was countered with federal support of the decision by a Republican president, it illustrated a shift from civil rights being an issue on party platforms to being a fact of American politics. Socially, the decision was the first marker of the civil rights movement and brought American attention to the issues at hand. The ruling in favor of desegregation created a positive atmosphere in which more change was to come, inspiring many of the events preceding the case. With this decision signifying the end of segregation in schoolings, it is often questioned how much effect the case had. Although outlawing and ending intentional segregation, in many schools today where minorities attend, they are the majority. This comes from the district's division along neighborhood lines, which are often unintentionally segregated due to class and economic standings. Even if the direct effect in segregated schoolings did not create a totally equal balance in today's education, the outcome of the Brown v. Board of Education case was the pivotal step in the reevaluation of American civil rights.